Today we're live to talk about the importance of associations, and we're joining today with several different individuals that are going to help us talk about the importance of what's happening in associations and really how the North American Mission Board has targeted associations. And our leaders today are going to help us to have a better understanding of kind of what's happened since the Great Commission Resurgence has passed. So we have three different individuals besides myself, who also was an associational missionary at one time. We have David George joining us today. David was in Alaska for a number of years, and we'll get a little bit of background on that maybe here in a little bit. And he was involved there during the passing of the Great Commission Resurgence in 2010, and then since then has now moved and is pastoring, but some of that comes as a result of what happened with the Great Commission Resurgence. Then we also have with us David Roberts, and David Roberts is the Bay Area Baptist Association Director. He's associational missionary there, are now called associational mission strategist. And he came in basically right as the Great Commission Resurgence had been passed a few years after that, and has kind of had the aftermath of some of that as well. And then we also have joining us Mark Bewley, and Mark has lost his connection for a second, so when we see him back, we will get him back on board with us. So guys, we're kind of shorthanded a little bit at this point. But guys, I'm glad to have you joining us today as we talk about associational work and the importance of associational work. Many things have happened since the Great Commission Resurgence took place. It's been amazing, really, how things have taken place and what all has happened with associations. Now, let's go back real quickly and just talk about the immediate dialogue of what actually happened. Many associational missionaries for many, many decades back on into HMB days, or Home Mission Board, for those who don't know, then it was transitioned into the North American Mission Board back around 2000. And so what had taken place is there was always a joint funding. So there were partnership agreements between the state conventions. And this is mostly in non-South areas, right? So in non-South areas, there was a partnership. And so there was a percentage worked out in every state, and how that worked out. And the cooperative program dollars that our churches gave into participating, in the cooperative program, they gave, and then part of that goes to the North American Mission Board, and the North American Mission Board worked to partner by helping to fund associational missionaries on the field. So much of that came kind of unglued in a lot of ways when the North American Mission Board approved the North American Mission Board, the Southern Baptist Convention approved the Great Commission Resurgence, and we're going to probably refer to that as GCR because it's easier to remember. So GCR stands for Great Commission Resurgence. And so when the GCR was passed, one of the first things that took place was that basically associational missionaries, known by several different names at that time. A lot of them went by went by directors of missions, some of them associational missionaries, but they were basically forced to transition into being what they call CPCs, or at that time, the CPC was known to be a church planting catalyst. So let's back up to that. The North American Mission Board, almost from the very beginning, their implementation of what they saw as the Great Commission Resurgence mandate was to basically eliminate a good number of people. They eliminated almost immediately over 100 staff that were there in the basically what we'd call the home office in Alpharetta. They got rid of funding basically all the evangelism staff in non-South states, and most of all their evangelism staff within the context of the North American Mission Board facility there. And these were guys that were men and women, but they were resourcing out in the field. So David is in David George. When you were in Alaska, these evangelism people would come and they would help you, right? I mean, they could be of a resource to you and to your churches as far as evangelism, cross-cultural evangelism, special event evangelism, all kinds of things. Well, what basically happened after the Great Commission Resurgence passed, they got rid of all the evangelism and they came in and replace them, not technically replace them, but that's what basically happened in essence, with marketing and with special event evangelism individuals. And so that department grew by about 50% all of a sudden. And so we had a large influx of evangelism people that disappeared. And then we had, all of a sudden, we had people that were there for marketing. Now, if you can control the narrative, you can start controlling what people think. And that became one of the big problems, I think, with the North American Mission Board after the Great Commission Resurgence happened. David George, let me throw it to you for just a second. Up in Alaska, you guys were definitely in a non-South area. In fact, the most non-South area of all of our convention, north of Canada. And what was the immediate impact that you guys saw there in Alaska as far as the impact on your association? What did you see when all this started taking place?
Well, I served as the associational missionary for 10 years. And in the beginning, we had a great relationship with NAMB. A lot of NAMB money was put into Alaska for church planting and for reaching especially the native Alaskan community. And we said for a number of years, we had a great partnership. When the GCR was being talked about, Dr. Azil came and visited Alaska several times. And toward his last several meetings there, he basically put it to us that we weren't doing a good enough job as far as starting churches, and it's my opinion that that was the start of trying to move out of a very diverse, large area, frontier ministry. And and then he last couple of meetings that we had with him, he basically said, look, we can put better money down in large cities down in the lower 48. And y'all are just not doing a good enough job.
Yeah. And let me interrupt you a second, David, because that became very obviously the strategy across the board. They came in with what they call sin cities pretty early. Right. And that was to be the largest 31 is how it started, 31 largest cities, metro areas. And it was pretty evident, and they were pretty verbal about diverting most of the funds to those areas. And in the area like you were, your area of Alaska, were you right there in Anchorage?
Well, I was headquartered in Anchorage, but I had 5 churches above the Arctic Circle. I had 2 on the Aleutian Islands, 1 in Kodiak, and several on Kenai Peninsula. All these places, it takes hours to get to.
Right. Well, but how large is Anchorage? How large is Anchorage?
Anchorage has about 750,000 people.
Okay, so 750,000. My largest area where I was in southeastern Michigan was Ann Arbor area, and the county again wasn't but several hundred thousand. So these areas were not considered to be very large in that sense. So this strategy that they had called Sin Cities all of a sudden diverted funds, and they started taking funds from the southern states and asking them to divert them as well. So all of a sudden funds were being diverted in lots of places. People were being eliminated. We didn't have the kind of resources that we needed at that point at all. And so areas like your area, not only where you were stationed primarily in Anchorage, but then all these other areas where you had villages. And like you said, it took hours to get to some of those places, I'm sure by a small plane and other ways to get to some of the small areas, but yet they were areas that needed churches. Now, David Roberts, you're in Michigan now. You came in kind of post the GCR actually being passed and seeing the initial upheaval of what was going on. But as you landed there, now you had been in Michigan longer than just when you came. You didn't come from the outside. But what was your observation of the churches and the church planting strategies that were going on at that point relative to what the partnership had been with the North American Mission Board?
Well, I can only speak to what I saw here in our association, and that was there was just a vacuum, a leadership vacuum here. Brother Tom Martin was the guy who preceded me, and he did a great job here for many years in the Bay Association. And I know at the end, when things began to change and GCR was getting implemented, that changed the funding structure. Funding was removed, and then from what I understand, the associational missionaries were encouraged to become church planting catalysts. And then along with that, there was some funding with that. So that was sort of, I guess, if you wanted to keep your job in the association, at least the funding that goes with it, you move into that position now as a church planting catalyst. And then from what I've heard back in the day, they were told, well, you have to plant a minimum of so many churches within a certain amount of time. And for an associational guy, that might all fall on him. And if he hadn't raised up or identified people that could help with a church plant, then, it all fell to him. So I know that Brother Tom's health went down, and eventually he passed away. And we had a couple of interim directors of missions here that tried to do their best to fill in, but it just never really took hold. And so when they put out a search and I answered the call to come here in 2014, I wasn't captive to any kind of previous agreements with NAMB or the state convention. I was not a CPC. And I felt pretty free to go and do what I needed to do to try to regroup, earn the trust of the pastors, and start building bridges and relationships between the churches.
Yeah, and that's good. You were able to come in. I wish Mark had been able to get back on here. I'll see. I just sent him a note. We'll see if he's able to get back on. But Mark was kind of in the middle of all that.
Yes.
In Michigan, as one of the ones trying to transition to be a CPC. Right. And the pressure was enormous on all of our associational guys to try to make this change. Now, some and we lost some really good people across the United States. I worked with a network of Baptist associations for about 4.5, almost 5 years, and did all their communications. And during that time, we had connections with guys all over the country. And I knew a number of those associational leaders that just said, look, my calling is to work as an associational missionary, right, and my calling is to be able to do multiple things. Yes, we want to help start churches, but it also is to help with church health. It's also right, to help with revitalizing churches. It also is to help in the midst of conflict and some of these other things. And the relabeling all of a sudden was, to start with, was very harsh in saying that, look, you're going to be a CPC. We're going to give you a year or two to transition, basically. And then we have, and it's like you said, David, there are expectations for numbers. We expect you to plant at least 3 churches, but every year, or et cetera, whatever it is. And I'm sure that was different, maybe in different areas. But in some cases, that's a very doable thing. Some cases, that's not very doable. And in many cases, that was not as doable, just depending on the population and the target groups and some of those kind of things. So right, it began to be quite the problem.
Bobby,
go ahead.
Let me say this, if I may. We were told exactly what you were saying, that you had planted so many churches. Our threat was to terminate NAMB's relationship with you. I had 18 church plants going. In fact, one of the leaders at NAMB said that, David, you're one of our best. And but yet it was put to me directly. You either choose, you have a choice. You can go full-time with NAMB, or you can go full-time with your association. And, but you cannot do both anymore. And I had churches that counted on me as an associational missionary. We had 54 churches in the association, and many of them counted on the director of missions. And I wasn't about to leave them. So I made the choice to give up the NAMB funding and be the associational missionary that God called me to be.
Yeah.
Well, and we could spend a lot of time digging into all the things. I know at the time I was an executive director, I had moved from a decade as an associational missionary. And David George, that's where you and I had first connected. And of course, Mike Proctor, your executive, he and I had been friends even before I became the executive director in Michigan. But when I became the executive director in Michigan, all the behind the scenes work was just incredible. And trying to what before had been a fairly cooperative kind of an effort. I mean, it wasn't like there wasn't some give and take and that kind of thing as far as the partnership agreement, but it became very one-sided all of a sudden. And I remember Jack Kwok, who was the executive director at the time in Ohio, and he said, Bobby, we've moved from cooperation to competition.
Yeah.
He said, that's all it is.
Yeah.
We've moved. And if you can do these numbers and you can hit these metrics and you're going to get this money. And the bottom line is you're not going to get money if you're not able to hit all these certain metrics. And they had defunded, community ministries. They had defunded lots of others. They had said, we're getting out of the property business. And so they were selling off, various church plant locations. Some of them were community centers that they helped to fund, a lot of those kind of things. And all of a sudden now we find out they've bought, millions and millions of dollars worth of houses. So let's don't get deep into all that stuff, but that gets a little frustrating. So let's talk
about the thing with us, Bobby, that we were 50% funded by NAMB. I was 50% funded by NAMB, 50% by the associational churches, but NAMB demanded to be the big player in as far as what we were to do. And no matter if it was 50-50 or whatever. And I saw that as just NAMB wanted complete control of what the associational missionaries, church planter catalysts were doing. What concerned me, I have a friend down in Colorado who wanted to do the same thing, wanted to keep his joint status. And they allowed him to do that. But up in Alaska, they did not. We had to make a choice which one that we were going to be.
I know here in Michigan, our churches made the choice to call me as their part-time pay associational missionary, and I answered the call. They loved the fact that there were no longer any strings attached, any agreements that or reporting and all of that had gone out the window after GCR, and I loved having the freedom just to serve the churches the way they wanted me to serve them.
Yeah.
And I think it's been a blessing. One of the good things, I guess, that has come out of it. But I do think they wish that they could have a full-time associational missionary like I would love to be. But right now, it's just got to be trivocational for me.
Well, when I came to Michigan, and I came as an associational missionary. That's how I came to serve in that role. And it was very different. I'd had opportunities and had interviewed with some associations in the Deep South in some places and had just some dialogue. And I just felt like they were dog paddling when it came to missions. That sounds terrible, but for the most part, it was more babysitting churches. And I wanted to be more hands-on. I wanted to be able to be involved. And so when I came to Michigan, I was excited about that. I had one pastor jokingly tell me one day, he said, Bobby, I have never known a pastor who can stand up and preach his job description. he said, you have down, church planting and church revitalization, church help. And he said, man, you can get off and crack off those 4 or 5 points just at the drop of a hat. And the reason is because when I came in, that's what we wanted to do. We set up, we knew by the agreement with the North American Mission Board, we were supposed to spend about 50% of our time doing church planting. And so I knew that, and we were very aggressive, working with that and working with planters and trying to help them with special event evangelism and just whatever else. And so that was a big part of it. But we also knew that we really needed to be working, helping those other churches in health. Helping them grow and doing things to give them strength and encourage the pastors and help healthy pastors to grow healthy churches,
right.
And some of those kind of things. And so the shifts that started taking place really, really concerned me severely. And the goal, what was being, let's say, advertised is, look, if you'll follow with us, the thing that makes evangelism, this is how they proposed it. And David George, you tell me if this was kind of what you were hearing up in Alaska too. But if you'll follow our path, evangelism, the best form of evangelism is church planting. And if you'll plant churches, then we're going to grow, and we're going to see significant growth across the convention because we're going to be able to plant churches. So they initially said they're only funding 2 roles. They defunded every other kind of missionary, said we're going to fund church planting catalysts and we're going to fund church planters, and that's it. And that was their only role. They told us we're not funding associational missionaries. Now, they did tell us that we don't care if you're an associational missionary. You can call them what you want to call them. We're going to have our purse strings, basically, is what it came down to. But you can call him what you want to call him, and he can do anything else he wants. He can help churches. He can work with conflict. He can do anything as long as he hits the metrics that we have set for church planting.
But they never
if he
told us
doesn't hit the metrics. Yeah, if he doesn't hit the metrics of church planting, then all that other stuff isn't going to matter. So, basically, we're going to control the path, that goes on. So that was the anticipation. That was the goal. Oh, and we just had Mark join us. So hang on just a second. Let's see if we can get Mark on in here. Mark, there you are. Can you hear us? Very good. Very good. Okay. See if you can drop your camera a little bit so we can get your head up in the upper part there. There we go. Oh, everybody applaud. Mark is so cute. We're glad to have him on board.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I want to tell you, we'll have a Mark break real fast. He was the first guy in to be able to jump in, and then all of a sudden we lost him. So, but I'm going to give you a Mark break. If you don't follow Mark on Facebook, you just need to. It's only worth it. It's the best humor you'll find almost every day, and it's because most of us who know Mark, we know that Mark is just a funny guy.
And, kind of funny looking too.
But
yeah. I didn't say the funny looking Mark. Now that wasn't me. Okay. So Mark, kind of where we were at the moment. I'm not sure how much you got in on there when you came in. Okay. So we're basically talking about, the objective that NAMB was saying, hey, if we can just plant a whole bunch more churches, it's going to be evangelistic and all the churches are going to grow and it's going to impact everybody. It's the old, if the water raises one boat, it's going to raise all the boats, kind of a thing. And so that was what was forecast. And at the time, back 2010 and the decade before, the numbers were anywhere from maybe 1,100 to 1,200, maybe even upwards of 1,400 churches a year were being planted in partnership with NAMB, with funding. There were other churches being planted, but those were the ones that we were in partnership with NAMB funding. And so now I want us to stop. We could keep digging up the past for a long time, but let's just stop and say, okay, this was what was promised. It was very painful. Many people got hurt. A lot of people were severely hurt in the midst of all of this. Some good ministers. I mean, you guys that had been in the middle of all this, you can agree, people. I know one guy here in the Atlanta metro area now who was with North American Mission Board for the longest time like this. And he ended up becoming a janitor. It's the only job he could find, but he has a heart for ministry and still does. So there's been lots of impact, but let's jump ahead. Okay. We're far enough down the road that we should be able to see some trend lines. We should be able to see some of the results of what happened when the Great Commission Resurgence passed. We got the cells, We got all the marketing stuff. Okay. We've gotten the message. Okay. But what is the fact? What are the facts of what is really happening? I'm going to play you a quick video clip, and then I want you guys to respond. And Mark, I'm going to ask you to respond first, if you will. This is Dr. Chuck Kelly. And Dr. Chuck Kelly wrote a book recently, and I'm not sure you guys have all read it, but he wrote a book recently where he went back and he asked that basic question of what is the results of what NAMB has promised us since the Great Commission Resurgence and their implementation to that. So I want us to look at this real fast, and then Mark, if you'll respond on the other side.
It was one Southern Baptist church for every 7,000 or more a population unit. That means we're losing ground, that our churches are not keeping up with the growth of the population. Okay, so what's plan B? If this present strategy is not allowing us to keep up, we got 10 years with this. We got 10 years of highly increased funding for church planting, 10 years of huge increase in conversation, promotion, and everything. If we are not able to keep up with what we were told we needed to do to match the pace of growth in the population around us, are we doomed to lose? Are we doomed to be overwhelmed by lostness?
Mark, your response to what Dr. Kelly has said.
I think it's important to understand that they teach us in planning a church and starting a church and pastoring a church. It is important that we close the back door as well as open the front door. And sometimes as associational missionaries, we have problems keeping our churches alive. We can plant 10, 15 churches in our association, but if 10 or 15 churches in our association are closing, we're defeating the purpose of reaching more people for Christ. We've got to not only plant new churches, but we've got to keep alive the churches that are already in existence, because those churches are reaching people. And so church health is something that NAMB is now trying to do. But back when they started this whole GCR thing, they focused primarily on just planting new churches and not worrying about the health of churches that are in existence now. And that really has hamstrung the Southern Baptist Convention, because we have lost many churches to going out the back door because there's not someone on the ground to help those churches reach people for Christ.
Yeah, and that's really the value in a lot of ways of the associational work that happens there. Of course, I understand, and you guys have heard this as well. I understand there's some associations where you've got a guy who is just kind of treading water. And it is, I know one particular individual who's a associational missionary. He's been there for 5-6 years. Now he retired from a church. And when I was talking to him one day, his comment to me, he said, Bobby, when they called me to this role, he said, they told me there's only one thing in my job description. He said, the one thing in my job description is I'm required to visit every church in the association at least 4 times a year. As long as I do that, I'm good. And I had a heart attack because, and I understand visiting churches and building relationships, all that's great and that's good. But there is so much more. A missionary can help bring together. I've always talked about with the churches I've pastored and planted, and then also the associations I've worked with, the importance of understanding an Acts 1:8 strategy, right? Okay. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the other parts of the world. Well, as an associational missionary, I always felt like, hey, look, I need to help resource those working to reach their Jerusalem and their local community. Correct. But I'm a part of the Judea, the broader part. And if I can help to cast a vision for reaching our Judea and help those in their Jerusalems to be better at reaching their Jerusalem. And then I can help be a conduit and a resource and a catalyst to help them be more effective in reaching Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the world. Then I'm doing a pretty good job. But, I understand there's some in their areas that the role of associations was just invaluable to them, or unvaluable, not invaluable, unvaluable, not valuable, I should say. Okay. But the strategy that ended up coming in the beginning with GCR, and I don't know, David and Mark, you guys were in the midst of kind of all this at the same time, but my sense was, if I'm in the room with Kevin Ezell or some of these others at that time, my sense was, you're not good enough. We want to do what we can to kind of move you out of the way, and we want to bring people in that are, top-notch people. That the people that are there are not getting the job done.
Well,
David, did you have that sense at all?
No, they wanted me to be a church planner catalyst full time, but that was not my calling.
Well, you were having a lot of effectiveness in that at that time too, in all fairness. But yeah, go ahead.
I can understand that, church planners have a lot of vigor and their passion, and they're out there winning souls. But what I saw was a lot, it's like pouring water in a sieve. I mean, the back door was open, and people would come. They would enjoy the passion. They would enjoy the newness. And then I saw people moving away. And so I think that's one of the big problems is they talk about evangelism and numbers and saving people, but there was very little done in discipleship.
Yeah, that seemed to be the case. Oftentimes that there was very little being done at that point. Mark, you had a thought.
Well, I just think that we threw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
When all this happened, we hamstrung ourselves in making it so much about church planting. And I understand that there were some ineffective associations.
Sure.
But you can't just toss all associations out the door, especially in the new work areas, and to try to focus in on church planting. You've got to also remember that the churches that exist now need help as well.
Yeah, I've got a comment on that. As I inherited this position, in a sense, here at the association, I came across some old Baptist State Convention annuals. And I've got one here. It's from 1994. And as I counted up in there, the churches that we had reporting as cooperating with the state convention, there were 304. This one here was from 2006. There were 308 churches reported. That was at least 5 years before GCR and all that took place. And so just this past year at our Baptist State Convention annual meeting, we had 297 churches. So we had less this year than we had back before GCR. And I'm just trying to figure out how that happens.
Yeah. Any thoughts, David George?
Laziness.
Just a one-word answer. Okay. Unpack that a little bit for us then.
Well, I had a church planner that was receiving a couple of $1,000 a month in support, and he complained to me that he was tired of filling out these reports. And I looked at him and I said, "Is it worth $2,000 a month for you to take 10 minutes to fill out a report?" And he got to thinking about it, and he said, "Well," I said, $2,000 for 10 minutes. That's pretty good income." And he started reporting after that.
Yeah.
And that was just an experience that I had. I think some
Yeah,
churches
no.
don't want to report because they consider it irrelevant.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. And you've got the accountability deal and a lot of that. So I remember telling one church plant I was working with kind of early on in my time in Michigan, similar kind of complaints, David, similar kind of thing. And if I remember when I made this particular statement, he was complaining about having to meet with the leadership team for his kind of sponsor or mother church. They wanted him to meet with them at least once a month, to kind of report and kind of tell them update, which seems reasonable to me. But I thought, really? And so I just told him, said, look, dude, I said, you need to be doing something other than sitting at home watching, Murder, She Wrote, and he looked at me like, what do you mean? I mean, we have personal things to do. And I thought, no, you're here to be planting a church, not to write off personal things. You need time with your family, that kind of thing. But he didn't have kids or anything else. And he just didn't want to take the hour to be able to go do that. So yeah, there is some truth
Well, I
to
just
some of
want to
that.
know how we can make that relevant, how we can make them feel that it's relevant to make the reports.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, when we were trying to get set up and you guys were in the waiting room, I was running a couple of these videos, and one of them that I ran, and what I had just, everybody knows, I had some computer problems, and now I'm not been able to get some of those loaded back up, so we'll have to do it again later. But one of them was on a quote that Kevin Ezell had said in a podcast with Jimmy Scroggins, who's pastor down in Florida. And it was like 2019. I'd have to go back and look up the actual date. But anyway, on the podcast, they're just talking. He's talking about going to NAMB, and he makes the comment that he knew when he came into NAMB, one, he was going in to lead an organization that he didn't support. He didn't support the way it was operating. He didn't support what it was doing. And if you look back at his church support, that kind of thing prior to his going there, that was obvious. They weren't big supporters of the cooperative program. But what his comment was that really stood out to me when I heard this podcast was he said that you just have to blow up. He said, we just have to blow up NAMB. And I thought, there is no words that have been more truthful out of that man's mouth in a long time. Because that basically is what happened. He came in and pressed the handle on the dynamite and just blew things all to pieces. And the idea was, well, we'll put it back together like we want it. Now, and we're not going to get sidetracked on this, but I'll give you one quick example. They tried to eliminate disaster relief. Okay, disaster relief is one of the greatest volunteer movements Southern Baptists have. The Yellow Shirt Army, and they tried to eliminate that. Well, boy, the upheaval was just enormous out of all the state conventions and their support people that were working with disaster relief and other places too. But what they were wanting to do was create this entity called Send Relief. And Send Relief was to be set up in such a way, and we know now what they're doing. They've set it up in such a way where they can get government grants and get government money and all this other stuff, which disaster relief never did. Well, they finally realized that the blow up was so enormous that they left disaster relief in place and just kind of left it, probably hoping it would just die, and then still created the Send Relief organization. Now the two of them kind of work side by side. And I thought, that was just another example of boom, push the dynamite and blow everything up. Mark, your thoughts, because you saw some of this as well in some of the relational kind of stuff that we saw going on.
Yeah, what we saw was a lot of the primary basic things that associations did no longer were able to be done, and those things that the churches needed from the association no longer was able to be provided by the association. And so what we found was the local church, the common pastor, was being undervalued and not being serviced like he should be serviced. One thing I've learned is because I'm now a local pastor as well, I do that dual role of serving as a pastor and AMS. But I don't have much of a relationship with the state convention, or hardly any relationship with the national convention. The associations that I've had good relationships with is where I've gotten the most help from my missionaries and those folks who serve on staff of the local associations. And so I think what we've done was we have hurt the local church and the local pastors by blowing these things up and not giving full service, because most churches will not have that local connection with a state convention or a national convention. They will not have that personal relationship. And so they feel left out. And I think that we have hurt ourselves in the long run as Southern Baptists. There's a lack of trust in Southern Baptist circles today. And I think a lot of that has to do with we're so far away from our state conventions and our national convention that we no longer get that service from the local associations. Now, there are some local associations in the South that are strong and serving people well and doing a good thing. And I applaud those. But to take half the country and blow that up, I think really has hurt the Southern Baptist Convention as a whole.
Yeah, I think you're probably right without any question at all. David Roberts, when we start thinking about what has happened since the passing of the Great Commission, we've already identified, man, we're not planning as many churches. I mean, 500-600 churches that we're aware of. And wow, Mark, you just opened up so many cans of worms there. The issue of trust has been just depleted in so many ways among many Southern Baptists, especially leaders and pastors. The issue of lack of transparency, not being able to see what's really going on. David Roberts, address for a second what your sense has been about the lack of transparency that we have, sort of say we have seen, but maybe have not seen, is better to say, and how that impacts the work of local churches and local associations.
Right. Well, I don't know what it's like in your church or your association, but I know here when we present a budget for the year, we have everything on there, what each ministry is going to get, what we're going to do for the churches, what I make, how much, gets put toward my retirement or my insurance or whatever. All that is there in black and white. But yet it seems like for the last few years at the SBC, we've had people go to microphones and ask for transparency, openness reports from entities about things like that and how money was spent, details of those things, and how things were funded. And they're just sort of stonewalled, and people have written trustees, people have asked for such things, and they're told, we'll get that to you, and then they don't get them. And so I think things like that really harm the relationships that should be strong in the SBC. And as somebody said, I don't know who it was originally, but relationships move at the speed of trust. And if we don't have that in place, there's going to be this sense of, I don't know how much I can really buy in right now, how much I can really support. And maybe we pick and choose what we feel safer with than what we don't. And so I think that's quite a bit of what's going on right now.
Well, the fact that all of this is donor funds, right? I mean, we don't usually call it donor funds. We call it offerings, that kind of, but that's what it is. Yeah. That's what they are. They're free will offerings. And so you would think, just like in your local setting, and even most associations, I don't know any associations that aren't like this as well. In most cases, you're able to know kind of what the salary structures are and what the amount people are making and what the benefit package is and all that other kind of stuff. Not to mention, not necessarily a check by check itemized report, but you've got an itemized report in your budget as we're spending this much for this kind of thing, this much for advertising and whatever, that kind of thing as you go.
Right.
And right now, you mess with people's pocketbook, people take that kind of personal. In fact, here's a comment James Cook just said. He said, seems like Ezel's stockpiling of investments is a big part of this story. I would think that's probably a fairly accurate statement. And as the general public, we don't know exactly why they're stockpiling so many investments, why we're investing in houses, and when you ask those questions, like Randy Adams, one of the executive directors up in the Northwest, he's publicly asked, hey, look, we just want to know. Tell us, just give us some response. And NAMB is mute. They're not responding at all to any of those questions, and that continues to be a huge issue because, like I said, this is donors' money. They want to know that you're spending what they are giving well at that point. David George, you've moved from Alaska, where it was very much non-South, very much dependent upon the partnerships. If I remember right, David, doesn't Alaska, hadn't they historically had a really good, strong partnership in Texas? Isn't that one of the stronger partnership states?
Well, Texas, Louisiana. Yeah, those are probably the two of the biggest.
Yeah, I was
Texas,
thinking so. Mike Proctor, who was y'all's executive director at the time, I just remember him saying he would come for a convention somewhere in the lower 48, and then he would go to Texas sometimes and do some work, with partnership churches and that kind of thing. But David, in your time in Alaska, but then even in your time now, remind me what state you're pastoring in now, David?
Phoenix, Arizona.
Phoenix, that's right. Arizona. Oh, I love Phoenix, except during the summer. But other than that, from both the perspective of having been in that non-South area in Alaska, but then now as a pastor, how does that impact you? How does that make you feel to know that the funds that are being given through the cooperative program, we can't get any kind of adequate reporting on that?
Well, I personally believe in transparency. In my church that I pastor, everybody knows where every dollar is spent, where it goes to. I don't know. My big concern about Alaska is what is the value of a soul, and we dealt with villages of 150 people. And I understand their reasoning, really putting dollars in cities of, 1 million, 4 million people. But Jesus said, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Well, you go to Kotzebue, Alaska, that is the ends of the earth. And to take away monies from going there so you can put it in lower 48 and the larger cities. Again, I understand the strategy, but it just doesn't sit very well with me. And I wish that they would take some of those dollars and have some concern for the Native Alaskans who live a lot differently when we live down here.
Yeah, there's no question. And that's true in a lot of places, a lot of non-South regions, where there is a great need for rural ministry, rural church planting, those kind of things. And
to tell you the truth, Bobby, they don't care whether you're Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, or whatever. They just want to hear the gospel.
Yeah.
And so.
Well, and you can't forget about the relational aspects of the gospel too. In smaller communities, that relational aspect is huge. That is so important. And probably when we were all younger, and even younger beyond our youth, the church was the center of community. Many of the, especially in the deep South, you see it, many of the churches are located now in places where there's not a high traffic pattern, because at the time the church was built, the building was built in a place where everything was around it. And now the city's kind of, or the town and area has grown up and grown away from it and grown around it, which, you know, is a shift. But before we leave the transparency and the financial issue, I want to jump back to one thing. You guys probably remember a couple of years ago in the national annual meeting for the Southern Baptist Convention. For the last several years, there has been a very directed approach, I guess would be a good way to say it, a very intentional approach to try to get more transparency through some motions, some resolutions, a variety of different things. And in Nashville, you may remember a pastor came to the floor and he had kind of a nice little speech where he said, I've been back and forth with your offices trying to get information about salary structures. The governing documents of the SBC say that we should, you know, any Southern Baptist Church members should be able to see, you know, what the salary structures are. And I keep getting the runaround. So finally, someone told me that I should go to the floor of the convention and ask here. And so he did in the question time, the Q&A time after the NAMB report by Kevin Ezell. And Kevin Ezell turned it over to the, basically the trustee chairman at that time. And he gave a roundabout non-answer at that point. So months later, after that, Ezell was in a pastor's meeting in Tennessee. And I want to show you this. I'm just going to read this real fast. So we can look at it. And then Mark, if you will comment on the other side of this. Basically, this is from the NAMB whistleblower emails. I pulled this, I guess, from the archived issues section, but it's titled, Keep Your Money, I Don't Care. Many of our West Tennessee pastors saw the true Kevin Ezell last fall when he spoke at our West Tennessee Pastors Conference. He was there mainly to address the issue with Joey Hutzfendler, I'm not sure I said his name right, but asking him for NAMB salary structures. Ezell sat right there and in a boastful way told us that 80% of his funding was given by the top 11% of SBC churches. He said, keep your money, I don't care, in quotes. And I believe he meant it. What brass to sit there and tell the Gibson County pastors and several others that our small gifts matter not to him, or gifts matter not to him. That's a Tennessee pastor. We did get permission to be able to publish that and dialogue about that. Mark, what would be your response to that kind of statement being said to a group of pastors in a local area?
Try that as a pastor in any church and see how long you last as the pastor of that church. It's unbelievable that someone would downplay the giving of local churches. You know, as Southern Baptists, back in the day, you had the cooperative agreements where the Association, State Convention, and the national entity worked together and created a budget for certain things. And no longer is that available to us. And it seems things went away. We no longer have transparency and that we have as Southern Baptists. And so just like I've taken national conventions and seen people try to make motions, get those things, and I'm for the trustee system, but the trustee system shouldn't be there to block the common Southern Baptist to get his answers. He should be able to get his answers, and Kevin Ezell shouldn't be able to talk to people that way. None of us should treat anyone that way. That's not Christ-like.
Yeah, well, and that's just one of numerous documented cases that kind of thing has been said, and I'm like you, Mark. That concerns me because I know I work with lots of small churches now, mostly smaller attendance churches, and many of them, I mean, they struggle to make their bills. They really do. But it's important to them to be able to give a percentage of what they have coming in undesignated gifts to be able to help support missionaries and be a part of the mission work that Southern Baptists are a part of. And that was the jewel of the cooperative program to begin with, that if everybody can be a part, it's not equal sacrifice. I mean, not equal gifts, but equal sacrifice. Everybody trying to give about the same as far as a percentage or something of that sort. It's not exactly how it's ended up working, but even the smallest church gives $50 a month to the cooperative program. They deserve to be treated with respect. Okay, let's wrap up with this, guys.
I'm reminded of the.
Go ahead.
I'm reminded of the widow's mite.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt. Well, guys, let's wrap up with this. I want us to talk about the future of associations in these last few minutes. It has been very difficult because in non-South areas, with all of the defunding of associations and all of the shifts and things that have changed, some associations have survived. I know of associations where they kind of have put together like a leadership team of some pastors or other lay leaders, and they're trying to keep going because they don't have an associational missionary. Others have done like happened with you, David Roberts. Associations pulled together and they've employed somebody part-time and they work another job, or they're retired and do that part-time. A few have been able to afford to, keep a guy on full-time, but not many. But what do you guys see really as the big impact in moving forward? David Roberts, let's start with you, and then we'll go kind of around the block.
Yeah, I think since I've become an associational missionary, that associations seem to be making a comeback. I feel like there's been a renewed emphasis on the importance of associations, particularly through the Southern Baptist Conference of Associational Leaders. I think Brother Ray Gentry has done a good job given everything that was handed to him to try to help rejuvenate and encourage and reinvigorate associational ministry across our country. And out of the 1,100 or so associations, over half of them now have some form of membership or interest in associating together as leaders. And I feel like that's been a good first step in bringing health back to associations across the SBC. And I feel like I think we're trending in the right direction as far as that's concerned.
Okay, David George?
I see mentorship is a big key of associational work. We've got to get more experienced, older pastors of larger churches to mentor some of our younger pastors, especially our church planters. And I think that would be a tremendous positive thing that could happen through the association is some kind of program of mentorship.
Yeah. Okay, Mark, what would your thoughts be in closing?
I think the future of the association goes back to the beginning. The Southern Baptist Convention started with an association. And I think unless we get back to the association being the center of the Southern Baptist Convention, where people feel a closeness to the convention. I remember back in the day when I was in Michigan, I would visit churches, and a lot of the pastors and a lot of the people would say, "You're the only person that we know that's from the Southern Baptist Convention that ever visits." And I think the association future is one that's strong, because if we're going to have a strong Southern Baptist Convention, we need to have strong associations.
Yes.
That is the basis, the foundation for the future of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Amen.
Yeah, I believe without any doubt that NAMB's implementation after the Great Commission Resurgence was a highly tactical error to try to eliminate associations. And I'd heard it said that they really wanted to get around and bypass both the state convention and the associations. And in many cases, we're seeing that that's happened. Even with the Send ministry, they've gone from Send cities now to Send states, and they've gone to total funding in a lot of our non-South states, where they're funding everybody on the state staff except an executive director. And North American Mission Board is even helping to fund some state executive directors and having that extra influence. I don't think that's a healthy thing. I don't think that's healthy at all. I think our associations, just like you said, Mark, they need to be the center of what's going on. And even the best of state conventions cannot have people out all over their state, the entire state, to be able to effectively work with all of those churches.
That's right.
It's just not possible. And they need to learn as state conventions how to work through those associations and help resource them so that they can be more effective on the ground. And I'll just say it, North American Mission Board and all other SBC entities need to do likewise, not as a promotional tool. Association isn't just here to promote the status quo of the state convention and the SBC as a whole, but they need to be resourcing that association to be able to be effective, to be able to minister with them at all. Well, guys, I sure appreciate your time today in taking a little bit of time. We haven't by any means been able to take care of all of the issues and deal with all of the things that have happened across the SBC. But it is helpful to be able to hear from associational missionaries who have served and or are serving now among churches, and seeing what the future of associations need to be, and to really look and say what kind of impact the North American Mission Board has been having on associations. It's just real important for associations to be able to hold their heads high. And I wish the North American Mission Board and others in our SBC would kind of stand tall and let that be the same. Well, guys, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you for joining us today. I hope those that are watching, you'll stay tuned, and we'll try to keep you updated on other SBC ideas and entities in the days ahead as we try to keep pace with what's happening among those in the SBC.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you.